You are listening to PT on Ice, The Older Adult, a collaboration between the Senior Rehab Project and the Institute of Clinical Excellence. This is a rebroadcast of an original episode that can be found at ptonice.com.
Hello, everybody. Christina Previtt here, and I am back for the Jerry on Ice version of the PT on Ice podcast. If you guys have been following Dustin and I at all, we did our first inaugural live course this past weekend in St. Louis, Missouri. It was amazing. It was super fun. Beth Templin over at HouseFit has a really innovative and cool model around how we're going to work on that continuum of wellness and physical function in older clients. And so we wish her all the best. And thank you so much, Beth, for having us with you. If you guys are interested in jumping on board to any of the modern management classes, we have our next online cohort starting on the 14th of June. And then our next course is in February. I believe we're in Wyoming. And so if you guys are thinking about jumping on board, you should do it. Totally a good Christmas present for yourselves in terms of doing continuing education. Okay. So if you guys have been following me at all, you probably know that I am about 18 and a half weeks pregnant with our first little one. My husband and I are expecting in May. So we have a little baby on the way, and the similarities between some of the things that I'm experiencing as I'm progressing through my pregnancy and some of the things that we talk about when we're talking about the older adult seem to have some surprising similarities. And as we were talking about different issues and conditions and things that we see in geriatric physical therapy, I couldn't help but really see some of the parallels between the two. So I will tell you now, I had a really fun time composing this list, and then kind of let me know what you think in terms of, am I completely missing the mark here, or is this something that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that either I've experienced these things or I can probably relate to you in some way. So number one is that you experience losses in mobility and the capacity to do things as you progress. Either progress through your pregnancy or progress in age. And so one of the things that I'm noticing, I was a national level Olympic lifter. No, I shouldn't say was, I still am, but I'm a pregnant lifter now. And things that used to feel really easy for me to rep out are now extremely challenging. I was demoing squats and talking about progressions on sit to stand this weekend in St. Louis, and I was getting winded. And I couldn't believe the changes in my aerobic and resistance capacity and endurance as I've progressed into, I'm now well into my second trimester. And so I started thinking about how that would feel for some of my older clients, where we were asking them to do things that before were very easy for them to do, or things that they were very used to doing without really having to think about it, and are now quite challenging. And so I saw that similarity and now have a very newfound appreciation for changes in status that happen that can have kind of a negative impact on our mental health, because sometimes it's really sad that I'm continuing to train and I'm getting worse. And so getting over that mental barrier of, these changes that naturally happen through either pregnancy or age is something that we need to consider. All right, number two, people sometimes offer to help you do things, and sometimes they don't. So as I progress, I'm starting to show that I look pregnant, which means that sometimes I have people do really nice things for me. Like they let me sit on a chair if the bus is full, or they open a door for me, which is really nice. And I see that common courtesy with some of our older clients as well. I actually was talking to a lovely lady on the train home from St. Louis. She was 75 years old, had just been on a line dancing cruise, which one is just so amazing. But two, was very physically resilient. Even though she had gone through some health complications, we were able to chat for about 15, 20 minutes. And she made me laugh because she said that sometimes she pulls the frail old lady card. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, well, sometimes it's just nice when people offer to do things for me or make sure that I get from one place to the other. She says, so sometimes I come over and I say in a very almost like she was admitting to being in like a meekish voice, even though she was very physically capable, and said that it's nice sometimes when they're young men and women help her get places or help her with her bags. So another parallel that's very nice that you see with pregnancy and sometimes with older age is that sometimes, I won't say all the time, but sometimes, and oftentimes they do, they will help you with things if they see that you're struggling a little bit because of your physical state. So number 3, which is on the other side of this, is that people assume you're incapable of doing things even when you're not. So I'm only 18 weeks pregnant. I was a very high level athlete before pregnancy. I'm still lifting, not as much as I was lifting before. And I'm taking considerations for my pelvic floor and to ensure diastasis recti and some of the changes that are happening physiologically with my positioning being a little bit more an anterior pelvic tilt, et cetera, et cetera. But people think that I'm doing things and they automatically want to help me. My in-laws will never let me lift a couch or help them with moving again until I am no longer pregnant, because they assume that I can't do anything, which is not true. And sometimes you hear that message over and over and over again. And in the course, Dustin and I talk about pre-traumatic stress syndrome. And that's because we are constantly told all of these negative things that we're incapable of doing because of X age or because of X state. And it's really interesting because you start like second guessing yourself, even though I'm not experiencing any issues and I have no contraindications to exercise or just physical function. I thought about that in terms of the messaging that I'm giving to my older clients. Am I assuming, not based on what they're telling me, but based on their age on their birth certificate, are that they're incapable of doing something when I have, the 75-year-old line dancer or my 85-year-old bowler or people who are still actively cruising on their own and completely independent. So that was number 3. Number 4, you become very fearful of falling. So I'm a klutz at the best of times, and falling is just something that happens. But we were talking in the course this weekend around, we never really worry about falls until we see that 65-year-old in our clinic or in our physiotherapy setting. And that fear of falling becomes a very real concern. The thing about being pregnant is that now I'm not worried so much about myself. I'm worried about something happening to the baby, some impact coming forward or anything like that, where before, if I was to fall, I would just get back up. Now I have something that I am thinking about that is more than myself. And so I was paralleling that fear and that feeling of fear when, for example, we have winter conditions, with myself being pregnant and also feeling how my clients who are a little bit older who have had injurious falls or are just worried about falling for whatever reason, how they must be feeling. And so that kind of fear being instilled in that, second guessing is probably something that I never would have experienced before being pregnant. So because of that fear of falling, number 5 is you think twice before making a more risky physical move. And that might be me hesitating to run to get something to make sure I don't trip, running after the phone, being able to do certain things in icy conditions, because before I had no fear of anything happening to me physically. If I did, I would just pick up and laugh at myself for being clumsy. But now that I'm pregnant, I feel like I have to be careful and make sure that everything was okay with little babe that is going and growing inside. And so I think about my older clients who may be a little bit more hesitant, especially when a physical therapist like me is saying, we're going to do floor transfers. And they're saying to me, Christina, I haven't gotten on the floor in 10 years. That fear or that hesitancy to be able to do things that are more physically challenging. So that was my number 5. 1, 2, 3, 5. See, now I'm losing count. Okay. So number 6. You've experienced increased lateral postural sway, aka the waddle. And this one is just funny because, as my center of mass, and my center of gravity moves more interior, I notice that I am starting to walk different, or as I pick things up, I have to be conscientious that I have a little baby bump. And so I was thinking about some of the gait kinematics when we're thinking about pregnancy and what I'm experiencing and how it makes you feel a little bit more off center, and how we can also see that in some of our older clients where we have an increase in lateral movement through walking, and it can have impacts on stability. So that one is just kind of more funny than anything else. So number 7 is that people tell you all of these terrible things that are going to happen. And so as soon as you become pregnant, I have started to hear the most terrifying things about how pregnancy ruins your body, how your body will never be the same. I've heard about traumatic pregnancy stories. I've seen some when I've been treating women who are pregnant, but I've heard horrible labor and delivery stories about get your sleep now, you'll never sleep again. And I started thinking again about that pre-traumatic stress. Now in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like what is going to happen to my body? Am I always going to be feeling like issues like incontinence, even though I'm a physical therapist who knows that that may not be the case for everybody. And I'm taking very proactive steps to make sure that that doesn't happen. I think about, how that translates. This is a very short period of my life. And unlike getting older, I am going to return to my previous state of being not pregnant. And my older clients, you can't reverse being older, unfortunately. But how many times have they heard before they hit 60, or, oh, it all goes downhill after 60, or everything starts to hurt as soon as you're 60, or, oh, wait for that arthritis, it'll creep up to you after 50 or 30 or 40 or 30. And it's terrifying. We always have these very negative messages about sometimes the experiences that women have during pregnancy and also the experience of getting older. And so we need to start combating those messages. And so I like to tell everyone that so far in my pregnancy, I've had very little side effects. I am still continuing to train. I'm still being very active. I have no fly restrictions. I'm still able to contribute to the Institute of Clinical Excellence the exact same way that I was before. And I'm going into a very happy stage of my life. And for some people with retirement, they are traveling. Some of them are busier than me. They are able to manage any chronic conditions or health issues that may be coming up because they have the reserve and resiliency. So changing that messaging, because it can be really scary when people just keep telling you all these bad things that are about to happen to you. And then you start perseverating on those things when they may not be your story. So I thought that was really interesting. Number 8, kind of going along with this, you sometimes have moments of self-doubt where you feel like you'll never be able to do the things you were once able to do. And this is something for me that was a question about myself getting pregnant in the first place, because I love weightlifting and I want to continue competing in weightlifting. But for some of my older clients, they are being told that as soon as, for example, they get a knee replacement, they'll never be able to kneel again, which means that they'll never be able to garden again. And they love gardening, so maybe they shouldn't get their knee replaced. And it's these type of conversations that make people feel, and in some respect, it's true that we do experience as losses of mobility, but we often have a variety of ways to compensate for that for a long period of time. And so you start thinking, well, maybe I'm never going to be able to do this again. And that can be really upsetting for people because, these are things that I love, and pregnancy is temporary, but 9-10 months feels like a really long time plus the postpartum period. And, I can't even imagine thinking that instead of 10 months, this is going to be something that's forever for me, that I'm not going to be able to do things. So I always try and find a way with my older clients, whatever their thoughts may be, depending on where they're at in their life. And sometimes we make compensations and sometimes we do lose that ability, but oftentimes there's at least something that we can do. So, number 9, sometimes you feel like you're going to the room for something and then you completely forget what it is. I thought I was like, pregnancy brain, come on. But there are times where I legitimately forget where I put my keys and I just had them. And so making that comparison to some of that cognitive reserve that we start to lose as we get older, not necessarily that Alzheimer's, dementia, vascular dementias, Lewy body dementias are inevitable parts of aging, but we are definitely seeing a decrease in cognitive reserve as we get older. And I'm seeing a decrease in cognitive reserve as I progress through this pregnancy. And so I have a newfound appreciation for giving some of my older clients more, like a little bit more patience of my time, to make sure that they are able to ask the things they want to ask or remember the things that they were hoping to ask me during assessment or during treatment. Okay, number 10. Again, this is just for fun. This is funny. For some, a cough or a sneeze is something that we are terrified of. And so as we progress through our pregnancy, the risk of incontinence goes up. We're seeing a lot of pressure down on the pelvic floor and a lot of distension of the anterior abdominal wall. And so, incontinence, especially stress incontinence with things like jumping, sneezing, coughing, is a reality in some person's pregnancies. So far, I've been pretty good, but it's also something that is true of my older clients, men and women, that stress incontinence or that change in the pelvic floor, either from some loss of muscular strength, some previous traumas or surgeries, all those things like that, just changes in reserve of the organ system as we get older, is something that we need to potentially discuss with our older clients. And having experienced how I've seen some of my pregnant clients be very concerned about different social settings, made me very aware that if this is also happening with my older clients, it may be just one other reason why they don't want to go out into the community because they are worried about not having a bathroom nearby or having some sort of embarrassing accident that they aren't going to be able to escape from. So those are my 10 similarities between being pregnant and getting older. I hope you guys found some of them useful, saw some oh yeah moments, and laughed along with me as I was going through these lists, because I had a really fun time figuring out these lists. And I thought it was just an interesting conversation to have on a Wednesday. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me or comment below. If you have had any similar experiences or can sympathize with me in my current state, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys in a couple of weeks, and have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, go to ptonice.com, click on the Courses tab, and check out Modern Management of the Older Adult. This is a course that myself and Christina Previtt are going to be teaching. It's 8 weeks, an online format, interactive, and solely focused on helping students change how they practice and how they work with older adults. For more information, just go to ptonice.com. Thanks.